Guys, welcome. We're having a few problems on the MoMENtum page, so hoping that our problems are less over on my page. Tonight, we have Mardo jumping across. Here we go. Hopefully this works. Problems over on the MoMENtum page. Oh, mate. I've no idea why, but it's working.
All right, fingers crossed, brother.
Can you hear me?
I gotcha. Loud and
Got it.
clear.
That's the strangest thing I've seen. Guys, for those that are jumping on either of our pages for the first time, normally I do this on MoMENtum and Mardo's joined us for the first time. Men with MoMENtum is the hot topic, and tonight we're going to go into all things performance, mindset, relationships, everything in between. So if you guys have any questions, thoughts, feel free to post them below. But Mardo,
Yeah, mate.
give us a 60-second summary for those. Oh, Gareth as well. Good people on board. Give us a 60-second summary of you and your world, just so people have got a little bit of context before we rip in.
Where I'm at currently?
Yeah,
Or...
and maybe even where you've been as well.
Okay. So I'm 45. I'd still classify myself as a trainer, but been in the fitness industry since I was 18. Worked in doing many different things as a trainer, but I guess sort of our niche now is working with tennis athletes. So we've been doing that for 20 years, strength and conditioning, nutrition, spend a lot of time on the road, on the professional tour, working overseas in various tennis academies. And yeah, now we're based on the sunny coast. So we were down in Sydney where you and I bumped heads lots of times and had a few good times together, mate, and worked in a couple of gyms there. And we ended up setting up our own sort of boutique personal training studio in Bondi. We ran that for 10 years and still was doing work on and off the tennis tour during that time. And we've relocated up to the Sunshine Coast, which was a pretty good move considering what's going on with COVID at the moment. And yeah, we've been up here, plugging away up here, absolutely love it. We've got a beautiful home right near the beach. As you know, mate, we love surfing and that sort of ocean lifestyle. Two young kids who are awesome kids, 11 and 7, very active. And Giselle and I spend 90% of our time in regards to generating income now in the online space. So we've created 10 years ago, we created online tennis fitness programs, and we also manage and mentor players that are sort of a bit more higher end. So we've got 40 players that we manage globally that are either sort of top world juniors or a couple of professional players as well. Only really doing about 5 face-to-face sessions a week now, just to stay, keep the skills as finely tuned as we can. And that's about it, mate. Still love training. Still every day I've got to do something, otherwise I go mad. But definitely not smash myself like I used to.
Mate, good summary. There's plenty of little avenues I want to go down. The first one probably around kind of performance and even dialing into the mindset element. Obviously, having worked with Lele, for those that don't understand, Leighton Hewitt, Casey Delacqua and Sam Stowes are probably more recent times. I'm really interested, like Leighton's obviously regarded or was regarded by many as like for his mental toughness online. On the tour. When you spent time with him, what was it like? What was that mental toughness like? Like, what's the difference between, the everyday punter from a mindset point of view and things that Leighton might have done, beliefs that he had, stories that he told himself, whatever it was to kind of get himself to the next level? What did you notice from a mindset point of view?
I think there's a common thread with a lot of sort of the high-end athletes that I've worked with, and it's consistency. And I think, people talk about self-belief a lot in, the high-performance athletic end. But you'd find players in any sport that do well, be it an AFL player, a tennis player, whatever the case, you'd find that to get to the point where they're at that upper level and they're just that step above everyone else. There's been some level of consistency, keeping things simple, and I think with that comes self-belief. There obviously has to be, some kind of, physical ability and coordination, which Leighton had. But from a physical perspective, Leighton I don't think he was ever the quickest or the strongest or anything like that. But what he had was this ability every day just to get up and just get done what he got done the day before and strive to do it better. And physically, his body could back up. I always told him his greatest physical attribute was his capacity to be able to get up and just get up the next day, whether it was illness or mild injury or fatigue. We'd say typically we'd start the week, we'd say we had 2 or 3 other high-end athletes training with us. And the start of the week, they'd probably be in front and most of the things after the first day, the second day, the third day, he just wouldn't change. His speed would stay the same. Everything would. And are you sore, mate? Oh, no, I'm all right, actually. Everyone would just drop off. By the end of the week, blokes would be sick. They'd be pulling out, giving you every excuse under the sun. And, he just has this mental capacity to be able just to push through. And it's so much of it's in the mind. Like, they talk, you look at the SAS training and, ultra marathon runners, and you think, how can your body do that? How can our bodies keep pushing up and breaking records that people never thought we'd be able to break? And it's the mind, the body follows. How banged up your body gets after things and long term is a different story, but our minds have so much more capacity than we realize most of the time. That's just for the general public.
What you mentioned self-belief, which is an interesting one. Do you think he's born with it, or what was he doing things to cultivate it? Obviously, I know his olds are kind of big on, have got a big sporting background as well, but where do you think that self-belief was generated and how he took it to the next level? And even working with some of those up and comers now, what are your kind of tools, or how do you generate more self-belief?
I think going through, everyone goes through periods, I call them seasons. Everyone has, you have your good seasons, you have your almost in-between seasons, then you have your bad seasons, and everyone's the same. It doesn't matter if you're Tony Robbins, Barack Obama, it doesn't matter who you are, everyone goes through struggles. That's just how we're wired. And these, what I think Leighton would do well, and a lot of successful people, not just athletes, is they have routines or they have rituals, and they don't waver from them. Like Leighton, for example, he was extremely punctual, he was extremely organised, and I think when you focus on those things, they distract you because you're focused on a goal. And me being organised, me being diligent with my preparation and my recovery is leading me towards my goal or my purpose. So when they get whacked by a bit of, doubt or a couple of losses, or they hear a couple of things, or they read a couple of things on social media, all of a sudden they go, oh, that's not good. But all of a sudden they just come back into what they're all about, what they're trying to achieve. So I don't know if necessarily, their self-belief is extremely higher than anyone else. I just think, that they have the capacity just to stay with their routine and be consistent with it. And it's like a distraction for them, like a positive distraction, because we get stuck in our heads so much. Just, I've got to tell myself every day when I do my morning rituals, what's your purpose? What's your focus? What are you trying to achieve? And then try to push everything else out of the picture. And sometimes you just feel like you're a dartboard in an Irish pub, everything's just smashing you.
So, that's like brilliant if people really understand that as, working out where true north is kind of coming into alignment with values, mottos, mantras, whatever it is. Do you remember any off the top of your head that really resonated for him, like on a deeper, like a soul level? What was his burn?
Oh, mate, that's a hard one for me to answer because I'm not him, but if I had to, just from my experience with him, I just think he just loved competing and he loved the
Mm.
game. And I think, people who are successful in any sport or in business or in life, they have that competitive nature, or they have that deep desire, that willingness. Some people, I think, and I definitely think Leighton was one of them. He obviously came from very good pedigree with his parents, and he had a really strong love for the game at a young age. And I think someone like Roger Federer is the same. Roger just has the body that can he's like, one in a million that can actually just back up physically and meet the needs, the exact demands of the sport. And that's why he's had such a good mesh with the game of tennis, where there's a lot of other people and they love the game. They do everything they can. They work just as hard as anyone else, but physically and genetically, they just don't have that to get to that next level, or they're not a Roger Federer. Yeah, I think a lot of it, to people who are highly successful, from my experience, a lot of them I think there's just something inside them that you just can't. If you could bottle it up and you could have a swig of it yourself, it'd be awesome. But it's that they just don't. Leighton just never really seemed to waver off what he was trying to achieve. Like every year we prepare for the Australian summer of tennis, which is, we're training in extreme conditions, and he'd hit for hours and hours on court, and then I'd train him a couple of hours in the afternoon. We'd go through our recovery protocols every day. It was extremely full on and intense. And like I said before, he got up every day, 6 days a week. He went through the motions, and every day he tried to be better. And every year, the goal would be the same. I want to win the Australian Open. That was his mindset. So every year I was like, mate, full respect. Got me?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Yeah. All right.
Gotcha.
Yep. All
You're
right.
talking about Leighton wanting to kind of get himself up for the Australian Open each year.
Yeah, and I think that was, his capacity to be able to do that. And once again, just coming back to consistency and routine and simplicity. I think if you can stick to those three things as an athlete or anything that's performance based, everything on top of it's almost like a blessing, like a bonus. And I think a lot of people out there, if you were honest with yourself and you said, am I striving every day to step forward towards my purpose or towards my goal? Am I being consistent in trying to get there? Am I, striving to hit my targets? And, are you keeping it simple? I think we can get too complicated with life and with our goals as well. Like, they've got to be attainable. And we've got to pat ourselves on the back when we get them and enjoy the process. And more importantly, enjoy whether we totally get where we want to go or, you get close to it. It's looking back and, breaking it down. What could we do better? What didn't go well, etc. But, I think those principles, they just work well in any space for performance.
Mm. Is that a similar kind of theme? Obviously, you work with a lot of kind of up and comers who have got a huge amount of talent. Is that a similar theme? Do you find that has its challenges? Those kind of maybe 13 to 17-year-old, the headspace bit. I assume there's an element of that needs to come to light, and that might end up being the difference between some of those youngsters in terms of making it or not. Is it?
100%. Like I look at. So, we'll get a player approaches online and say, oh, I'm number one in America for under 15s, and can you help us with our programming? And we go through quite a detailed process initially. We try to work out if we're the right match. And, we're busy enough, we're lucky enough that we can say to players, look, we don't know if we're the right people for you. And the way we work that out is we get them to fill out some forms and we have an interview with them online. And a lot of the process, well, going through that process, what we're trying to work out is what's the aptitude of the player. And what I mean by that is, are they going to be able to be diligent enough? Are they going to be able to see this through? And if we get a good feeling about them, then we will, we'll take them on a 10-week trial. And during that time, we set some markers. So if I know that most young players don't recover well and they don't prepare well, and I consider recovery preparation, because as soon as you finish training, you're preparing for your next session. So I don't call it recovery, I call it preparation, because that's a different mindset for an athlete. When they're talking recovery, it's like, I've just finished that, now I've got to do more. When you're saying, okay, you finished that, now we're preparing for the next session, whether it be tomorrow or the afternoon, the mindset's more like the future rather than the past. So I push a lot in that space initially, because a lot of them aren't doing it well enough. And then if they stick to the guidelines I give them and I can manage and monitor how they're going with it, that's always a good sign. Because, they've got a lot of stuff they've got to deal with, young players. They're, a lot of them are doing schooling. They've got pressure from parents. It's a heavy financial burden for families as well. Any sort of trying to make it in any professional sport. And there's a lot of factors that come into play. And most importantly, one of our mottos is, you prepare the person rather than the player. So, looking at markers like, how you talk about resilience in a young player, and it's so important. It's one thing that's just dropping by the wayside every decade. And people think that it's just kids are getting soft. But when we look back now at what I've learned over the last couple of years about resilience, it's not so much about them working hard, which is important. It's more about them understanding who they are and what works for them, and them being happy with themselves. So if they're happy within themselves, and they feel like they're contributing and they're connected, it's a lot easier to get them to become more resilient with their work ethic. So you're looking at that as well, and that can be challenging, but that's an area that I just love pushing into with players. Seeing a player happy and seeing him like the light bulbs go off, and they start working things out for himself, and then they know that you've got their back. That's important as well.
Mate, it's massive. I know, obviously, big on AFL, but they've started really looking at that over the last few years. I think Damien Hardwick and Nathan Buckley are probably at the forefront of that, of really starting to look at players as an individual. And even reading Paul Rouge's book, obviously, Dylan, his son, is part of MoMENtum. He was probably one of the people at the forefront of really starting to look at players as an individual, as opposed to just a cog in the system, which, it sounds like it's a massive way forward. Talking of consistency, one of the things, I think we've known each other for 13 odd years now, is, and for those in the fitness space, or those that aren't, the 20 years in the fitness space, which is how Amato's been in there, is a long time. The average turnover is, I think, 9 months.
Dinosaur, mate.
Dinosaur, absolutely. What is it that, one of the things that I've always admired in you is your consistency. What do you put that down to? Is it a similar kind of vein of just rituals and habits? Is it, mottos and mantras that you tell yourself? Is it always coming back to your why? Like, what is it that keeps you consistent?
That's a good question, mate. And it's one thing that that 15 years ago, I actually did quite a bit of work just thinking, as a trainer and as a person, to make an impact, I think you've got to be consistent with your energy. So I wouldn't say I'm the most over-the-top enthusiastic person. I try to just sort of, sit at maybe like a 6 or 7 out of a 10, if that was a scale, in regards to my energy. And like, I feel like I'm upbeat, but I don't try not to be overbearing at the same time. And that's just, I guess, a bit of more my personality rather than sort of me being focused on it. But when I sort of was aware of that, I said, okay, now it's a matter of just managing that from a daily basis, so that every time I'm working with a client or I'm encountering people consistently, I want them to know that this is who I am every day, so they can build a level of trust in our relationship. If I'm coming in, I'm kicking stones one day, and the next day I'm coming in bouncing off the walls, I mean, how much really subconsciously are people going to want to invest in me when I'm like that? So it's one thing that I did do a bit of work on, and it was more just being conscious of it. It wasn't like a battle to do it. And it's one thing even now that when I'm training the players I work with online or the kids that I'm seeing face to face, I do, if I'm not in the right frame of mind, I'll sort of spend a couple of minutes just priming myself to get to that space, because there's a level of expectation, right? That you've got to work to when someone's paying you to do something. And as a trainer, you can't be moping around in that space. So, I mean, things that I do, I definitely have a couple of rituals that I do, and I keep adding to them as I get more comfortable with them. And, I think like I said before, with consistency comes, you become more familiar and things become easier. So things you got the capacity to be able to evolve them. But the big one for me is how I start the day. A lot of times I actually wake up in the morning and my head's just not in a great space. So I do work before I go to sleep. I do some breathing and some meditation and prayer. And normally when I wake up in the morning, if I had to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I probably feel like a 5 most mornings. And it's always been the case. And it's probably only been the last couple of years that I've actually really started to do something about it, just consciously. So I spend 3 to 5 minutes initially. I just lay down wherever I am. I find a nice quiet space and I just do some deep breathing. And I just start to, think through my mind, what I'm grateful for. I hand the day over, so I just surrender the day to God. And then I go through a process of just sitting in that space for a couple of minutes. I try not to focus too much on my breathing, because I feel for me that takes a bit of emphasis off my thoughts. So it varies every morning what happens in that space. It's actually really cool. Like I just sort of let it happen as it happens. And sometimes I'll just focus on one thing. Other times I'm just grateful for lots of things and things cross my mind. And then I just get a little bit more energetic. So I'll stand up and I'll do a bit more like aggressive breathing. So similar to like what Wim Hof does. And I just start to go through a process where I do some self-affirmation. So just talk about loving myself, what I'm thankful for about myself. And then I'll go through some prayers. So when I pray, I normally sort of will back the breathing off a little bit. So I'm not sort of overly focused on the breathing. And normally by that time, I'm in such a good headspace. Like I can just feel like it just feels like everything's just flowing really well. So I normally pray up. So I pray to God and I praise God and I thank him. And then I pray out. So I'll pray for friends, and often you're in my prayers, Wazza. And I pray in. So I'll pray for myself and my family and for, prosperity and those sorts of things. And then that's it. I'm off rocking and rolling. And I find for me, if I do that every day, it just sort of sets me up with a great platform for the rest of the day. And then through the day, I actually have the capacity then just to tap back in. I can tap back into that if I have something that sort of rocks me a little bit. I can just go and do a couple of minutes of breathing, or whether I'm in the office working or not, I still, then it's so easy for me. It's almost like just turning a tap on, and it just shifts me back into my lane.
What you talk about your faith a fair bit when we have a chat, and it's something that's probably become stronger, I reckon. Do you reckon, like maybe over the last 5 years? Do you reckon? I think you've probably feel like you've connected with it more.
Yeah,
the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's not something really like I'm a Christian. I'm a strong Christian, but it's not something I really Like, he used to talk about the Bible bashers, and that's never really been my style. I just live a certain way that's according to the principles of the God that I worship. And if people are drawn to that and they want to know about it, I do, like, I'll invite people to church that I feel connected to, and that just comes from a place of care. If I feel like church can offer someone, and the fellowship at the church can offer them, something which I think it can offer to everyone, then I have no hesitation in asking them. But if someone was an atheist, and it has happened to me before, actually a good friend of mine, like, really attacked me one night, and I just didn't. I just wouldn't even respond.
Mm.
Just trying to call me. Um, yeah. So look, it is super important to me, mate. It really is. Like, I try to put it at the forefront, my faith, of my every decision I make, and I try to. I'm not necessarily put God first, but I try to make my actions and my voice um, come from a place of love and come from a place of my faith. And
Mm.
I don't always get it right. Like, I've made mistakes in the past with people in the industry, with friends, with family, whatever the case. It's just, for me, so good to have such a good foundation that I can rely on. That's what I get the most out of it.
Mm.
I just don't have to search. I feel like I've found that, which is super important for me.
Yeah. Mate, yeah, it again comes back to kind of giving you almost an anchor point, and a true north that keeps coming back to your center. What is
Yeah.
it that how do you install that or instill that in the kids? Not necessarily like the religious part, but the family values. Have you got them written out as a family? Is it a case of, you just work, kind of educating them, so to
Mm.
speak, on what's right and wrong, if there is such a
Yeah.
thing? Like, what does that look like in terms of boundaries and signposts for the kids?
Hey, that's such a good question, Blake. That's awesome question. It's something that I wouldn't say battled with, but it's something that it's so high on my list of priorities, and it's been that way for a long time. But I feel like I need the headspace and the someone to almost guide me through, which I feel like I've got now. I've got, like, a guy that we've just basically connected, and he's, I wouldn't even know what you call him, a life coach, but he's been great for me in regards to working through what I consider my values.
Mm.
Because I said exactly this to him. I said, I want to know, I want to set my values for my family so that my kids, by the time they're 13, 14, they know what they are. And they're going to get to a point where they go, well, I don't feel like those values align really well for me. That's fine, but as long as they're in the house and they're sort of, I guess to a degree under our control, that's sort of how we'll encourage them to live. So look, we've got every night, we're lucky, Giselle and I, we sit and have dinner as a family, like a bit of old school, and we just have the opportunity to talk through situations with them. Sometimes, the kids have got themselves in strife at home or at school, and it's awesome just to be able to have the capacity to be able to work through them and then explain to them how we would handle it. Or, one thing I think I've really tried to do well in my life is people who have gone before you, they set like a platform, they lay like a path for us.
Mm.
And it's up to us if we want to follow them, right? So, say if your dad's an alcoholic and you think, oh, I'd never want to be an alcoholic, like that's shit house. Like, I've seen what it does to families and to people. And I know people have the choice if they want to go down that path. And I know it's a real simple analogy, but it's so true. So I'm so big on that. Like, will always ask someone, no matter where I am, if I think they've done something or there's someone that they've got an attribute that I would love to have at their age. It doesn't matter if they're younger than me or older. Actually, it's more just something that they've done or they're doing. I've got no hesitation whether I've got to pay them for their knowledge or I've got to, they're happy just to sit down and tell me. I love spending time, particularly with older males that are probably 10, 15 years older than me that have not necessarily been successful and made lots of money, but they've been successful in other areas also, like fathering or, whatever the case, because you can read books and books and books, but practicality's massive for me. So when I can see someone, I'm like, tell me a bit about that. So I try to instill that into the kids, like, see what I do and do it, and that keeps me accountable as well.
Yeah, well, definitely no child psychologist, but from what I've read, what you say doesn't mean a huge amount.
Yeah,
It's like they're watching what you're doing. So if you're out of alignment there, you're not going to be able to kind of,
yeah.
I guess, influence them and have the impact that you want just through your words. The actions obviously need to play a role. How have kids made you a better human and a better man?
Oh, mate, patience. Like today, for example, so Giselle's away, she's on on a surfing trip, and so she took off this morning, and I, got the kids to school, which I love. We love spending time with them like that and walk them up to school. And I mean, you come and stay with us, you know how we live. And came home, spent the day working. I knew, I had a busy arvo. I'd take the kids to athletics training and I actually go and mark some of the lines out because it's like an old school grass athletics track. And it just started to get a bit stressful with the kids. They weren't listening too well. And then I knew I had this coming up tonight. I had to get home, cook dinner, get them ready. So my patience was tested. And I think every day as a parent, you get tested with your patience. And it's funny because they're like, if you look at them like, say you're like a boss and they're your employees and you can tell them what to do, but they don't necessarily listen to you all the time. It's not like you can fire them,
Yeah.
and I'm not big on smacking and that sort of thing. So for me, it's like in the heat of the moment, a lot of times I don't like yelling. In the heat of the moment, sometimes it's like, I can't deal with this now. I'm going to have to wait to deal with this normally at dinner time or when we lay in bed with the kids at night. We have the opportunity to say, you know what happened today? That's not cool. You can't do that. This is why. And if you do it when you're older in 5 years' time, this is probably what your friends are going to do to you or what's going to happen. So yeah, like the patience and also working out the right time to do things as well, like picking your battles. So not always just, before I try to be patient and I try before I react, I try to take a deep breath, think about the situation and think, is this worth what I'm about to do? Is it worth almost the scarring that I could deliver to my kids by the way I'm about to act? And I feel that's really served me pretty well actually with the kids. I'm pretty confident they feel like they can come to me and tell me a lot of things, and particularly Jacob, he's 11, and the stuff that he's starting to tell me, I'm thinking, I'm surprised this bloke's telling his old man these sorts of things, but it's great. I'm stoked I got that relationship with him already.
And from a relationship point of view, how has that changed in the last 10 years? Jacob's 11 now, compared to pre, and what are the different challenges that you face? Essentially in the first 10 years of your relationship to the more recent 10?
Well, I think when kids are young, you're more, I think, the mums, obviously mum and dad are important. But from what I've read and working with predominantly with young players also for quite a long time now, I feel like the father's role, it's always important, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the father's role is a lot stronger when the child sort of hits that 10-year bracket. And I've really noticed that with Jacob. But Jacinta sort of at the moment, she sort of will float between Giselle or I for gaining knowledge and support and those sorts of things. Where Jacob now, he's asking me a lot more things about life and about experience and competing and what's wrong and right and those sorts of things. And, we have conversations and say, would you speak to mum about this? And he's like, oh, probably not. I just feel like it's something I can ask you about. And I know from a male's perspective, and from mentoring a lot of people over my time, younger athletes, from 10 till probably 14, I think a father's super important to be a good example and to instill things into kids, whether they're your own kids or not. And then from 14 onwards, probably 14 to 18, I think it's super important to have mentors. So the dad's still and the mum's still going to stay, in my opinion, important. But kids start looking and it's almost like they're familiar with you. They almost feel like they've gained enough knowledge and information from you. They want to start sussing other things out themselves. And that's a role that I take really, really seriously as a trainer, and the space that I'm in now, working with young athletes, like I was saying before, treating them the person before the player, because I know I can help set them up for life. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I know that if I can instill just basic values in them, it's going to help to serve them in anything they choose to do with their lives. So that mentor role is so important. And a lot of people I think kids will steer a bit more away from the parents for their knowledge base and their experiences, and they'll look for mentors, which is why it's important to have good mentors out there and for people to be willing to, to help young people coming throughout.
Well, up until 150 years ago, that age group, that 14 to 15, there was like all the tribes had rites of passage.
Yeah.
Transitioned you from that kind of boyhood to manhood, and that's disappeared for most of the world. And now you've got a whole bunch of like man-child kind of walking around they're still very caught in that kind of boy space. So
100%.
It's the other thing I think as well, and you and I have spoken about this, and my brother's on here now, he can talk to it as well. It's like, we were, in a position where we didn't have a great male role model. And even I know, a lot of mates, similar boat, you look at the numbers of, in terms of the teachers at school. And again, I think the large majority, at least the last statistics I heard, were very kind of female dominant. So if any, bloke growing up is in a position where they can find a male mentor, it's such an amazing thing. And you've got 8 years on me, and that's been a big part for me. And in more recent years, having Dills' dad, Paul Roos, and Scotty Waters as two guys that I really look up to. But it took me a good 30 years to find that, and I'm with you. Like, life probably could have been a little bit easier had I managed. To track down a male role model between that
100%.
kind of 13 and 18 period. So,
you and I have spoken a bit about that space, and we've tried to push through it, and try to see what's gone on for you. And I think you've hit the nail on the head 100%. And you can see the value in it and the importance of it, right? It's, we've got to learn. We've got to learn somehow. Like everyone, we're all, as young people, we all evolve. Like, it's just how that happens, and who influences the most. I think you could take any child and put them in an environment, and if it's a good environment, I think they're gonna do well and have good values and make good choices. And the same goes for the other side as well. If they're in a bad environment, what do you expect's going to happen? Like, it's only the minority of kids that come through those situations and find something. And you look at the sporting realm, you look at the NFL, and I don't know if you've ever seen the stats on how many African-American guys in the NFL come from single homes, from single-parent homes. Big families, the mum's working a butt off, and they just find a way to get through it. But it doesn't mean that they've been successful at playing sport, but it doesn't mean that they've set up their development pathways being there as a person. So then all of
Mm,
a sudden they finish playing their sport and they've got their money. Sometimes they might burn it out because they've had no one help them manage their money because there's been no one in the family to help them that has the knowledge base.
mm,
And all of a sudden, once the sport stops, they're just left in this hole, and it's pretty sad. So yeah, look, I I try to find kids that I can help, and a lot of the times we're lucky because it's in our workspace.
mm,
And there's a couple of kids in our area that are in single parent homes, and they're young kids, sort of around Jacob's age, and I sort of make it my responsibility. I know, they'll never be their father, but I still try to treat them like they're my son in some regards. And
mm,
sometimes it's a matter of pulling them up and saying, mate, you can't do that. You don't say those things, you don't do those things, and they want that. They know inside it's
mm,
innate in us that, like you said about growing up in a village, you'd have one person would see you do something and come and clip you over the ear and say, you can't do that because it's not right for the village and it's going to do this to that person, etc. And it doesn't have to be your parent. It's just someone that cares for you. And that's one thing that Giselle and I tell the kids all the time is when we tell you things and you think you're mad at us, it's because we don't want you to do those things again.
mm,
And we're not doing it because we don't like you. We're doing it for the opposite reason. We're doing it because we love you more than anything. And we want you to realize that if you keep doing that, it's going to create a bad habit for you. And that bad
mm,
habit's going to lead you to making bad choices in the future that could get you in a bad situation. And I think
mm,
explaining that to young people, they get it. It's a bit of a
mm.
no-brainer. That's a bit of the process. Once they understand that, then they're a lot more open to listening to you and they're a lot more open to taking your advice.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I never explained that as a youngster, but it would have made a big difference. And I think, I've said to you all along that
Mm.
you've got a talent and a ability as a human to have people feel very kind of safe, supported, and seen, which, especially from a male point of view, to have that, 11 to 16-year-old bracket, supporting them, obviously,
Yeah.
I guess, at least on the surface, it looks first and foremost from a tennis point of view, but really,
Mm.
as you say, from a people point of view first, mate, is amazing. So that, is definitely one of the things I've admired most. Mate, Instagram will cut us off pretty soon, but
Yep.
from a life motto, mantra, and everyone's got their own things that they kind of, stick to when it comes to values, mottos, and mantras. But what are three real significant mantras, mottos, thoughts that you have that have helped you get to where you are, and maybe potentially have even helped you get through kind of those tougher times?
Well, I've got a few that pop to mind. I don't know what you'd call them, but big one, which this guy who's sort of doing some coaching with me at the moment, his name is John George, and he works this 5 principles basically of inner peace. And one of the first processes is self-love.
Mm,
So, telling myself, and I hadn't really done it before. It actually blew me away how effective it was. Like every day, just telling myself, like thinking, do I actually love myself? Like, and I think a lot of
mm,
people probably don't. And
mm,
then going, well, what do I love about myself? And then just talking to myself through those things. Because then all of a sudden you go, I love this, I love that. Well, I'm actually not doing that too well. And it starts to give you areas that you can improve as well. So self-love
mm,
and talking to myself in that space with some affirmations. A couple
mm,
of sort of, I guess, mantras, sayings that Giselle and I have is one is, be comfortable being uncomfortable. So
mm,
always putting yourself in the space where you're challenged. because you know yourself, mate. You've been through a lot. You've been highly successful. You've had some hard times as well, like I said before, some seasons. And it's through the hard seasons that we learn the most. It's where our spine gets a bit more reinforced. And if we're not putting ourselves in a space, where you're going to challenge yourself and be uncomfortable, then our growth is going to be minimal. You keep going to work doing the same thing every day that you don't like, well, what's the outcome's not going to be any different than it was 10 years ago. So that's a good one for us. Another one is just find a way. Like, I think I showed you the photo of the graffiti we got done on our wall with all our sayings and stuff, and I'll flick it through and you can post it up to your gang tomorrow as well, because we just got a lot of stuff on there that sort of resonates with our family network. Find a way is a big one, and that's one I think I got from Leighton Hewitt, and I'd always call it out when he was playing a match. Just if he was injured, if he was tired, it's just find a way to get through it. Any situation, get yourself uncomfortable, and then find a way out of it. And I think if you can run with those two things, then you're going to learn a lot. You're going to build self-confidence, because you're going, I'm comfortable going into situations I'm not comfortable normally in, but I know I'll find a way to get out of it. And I think, like I said before, mate, they're just simple things that I think on a daily basis I try to just keep telling myself. And physically it's worked well for me, mentally and emotionally. Find a way out of it is always just been so super effective for me.
Mate, beautiful. I'll talk to you for hours, but I'll probably do that in person over the next few weeks when I come up your way. So
get you out in the swag, mate. We'll go out. I'll take you to some good spots, mate. We'll get some waves and sit around the fire and have a cup of tea at night, hey?
Perfect. We will organise those dates. Mate, really appreciate you jumping on, giving plenty of wisdom. And guys, jump across to his page for all things health, fitness and fitness. The big fella works from everyone. What's the youngest age you work with tennis fitness?
8-year-olds.
8 to 18-ish.
Yeah. And look, Blake, thanks. I love what you guys are doing. It's fantastic, mate. It's, not only, I think, health, just mental health and lifestyle and happiness, and we've all just got to focus on it in these crazy times, the way the world's going, and we've all got to connect. And you've put me onto some awesome books, and I know you probably share with your community, but, just people out there, just read, get around the right people, get yourself uncomfortable in the right space and find a way to get through it. Be consistent, and, you'll hang around these guys, and you'll be keep learning from them. You'll be on the way.
Beautiful. Thanks, big fella.
All right,
guys. We'll
see you
next
guys.
week for another episode.
Pleasure. See ya.